Hi and welcome to this biology revision session on transport in cells. So we're going to start off by looking at diffusion, and diffusion is the movement of particles from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Let's just imagine that I introduced some particles of deodorant in this corner of the room. Okay, so I'm spraying the deodorant and I'm creating a large concentration in this corner. Okay, so we've got a high concentration over here, and in the rest of the room we've got a low concentration. And this creates what we call a concentration gradient, which goes from the high concentration to the low concentration. Okay, now because these particles are moving randomly, what's going to end up happening is that they spread out. They're not deliberately doing this. It's just that because there are a lot in this corner to begin with, statistically, the chances are that some of them are going to move out of that corner. So they're moving from the higher concentration to the lower concentration. If we'd already started with a couple of particles elsewhere in the room, they could statistically go anywhere else in the room, but they are less likely to go to where the high concentration is than they are to go to where the lower concentration is. So things on average move from a higher concentration to a lower concentration, and that is what we call diffusion. Now, where does this happen in cells? So if we're looking at gas exchange, we've got oxygen and carbon dioxide diffusing into and out of cells. So oxygen being used for respiration, diffusing into cells, getting used in the process of respiration, that being turned into carbon dioxide through the reaction with glucose, and then that carbon dioxide diffusing back out of the cells and into the bloodstream. Similarly, another waste product from cells is urea, and that will also diffuse from the cells into the blood plasma, and then it's taken to the kidneys where it is excreted from the body. Now, the factors that affect the rate of diffusion are, firstly, the difference in concentrations, or the concentration gradient. So if you've got a larger difference in the concentrations, the process of those particles spreading out is going to appear to happen quicker, just because of the chances of the particles moving from one place to another being greater. If you've got a higher temperature, that will also increase the rate of diffusion, because those particles are going to have more energy and therefore are going to be moving more quickly. And then the final thing is the surface area of the membrane through which the diffusion is taking place. If it's got a larger surface area, more particles can be diffusing through it at any one time, and therefore the rate of diffusion is much higher. So surface area is really, really important. If you're a single-celled organism, you already have a very large surface area in relation to your volume. And what that means is that, say, the oxygen and carbon dioxide can be transported in and out of your cell without anything else needing to support that. Okay, it will be enough to meet your needs. If you're a large multicellular organism, though, you have a much smaller surface area to volume ratio. So we need to have organ systems in our bodies that help this rapid transport of molecules into and out of cells. So in mammals, we've got the small intestine and the lungs. The small intestine is designed so that it has a very, very large surface area. You might remember it having those little villi on it, those little protrusions that increase the surface area. Okay. In your lungs, you've got the alveoli, which again are just there to create a large surface area so that more gas can diffuse across. The equivalent in fish is the gills, and the gills again have a high surface area to allow lots of oxygen to be transported across that membrane. And then in plants, we're looking at leaves and roots having a high surface area. So the leaves in general being large and flat to increase the surface area, and the roots having those little root hair cells that increase the surface area of the root. So what makes an effective exchange surface? Well, I think we've already emphasised the large surface area, and I can't emphasise that enough. You also need a very thin membrane so that the particles aren't having to diffuse a long way across that membrane. And in animals, you need an efficient blood supply to help move those molecules from one place to another in the body. Okay, our second type of transport is osmosis. And osmosis is the diffusion of water from a dilute solution to a concentrated solution, and it happens across a partially permeable membrane. Okay, so if we have a look at this diagram, we can see that in the first instance, we've got one side of the membrane has 4 sugar molecules in, the other side has 1 sugar molecule. So the sugar is more concentrated on the right hand side and less concentrated on the left hand side. The result of that is that you've therefore got more water molecules on the left hand side in relation to sugar molecules than you do on the right hand side. So the process of osmosis causes some of those water particles to move from the left to the right hand side. Now, the reason the water is doing that rather than the sugar moving back the other way is because of this partially permeable membrane. Because the sugar molecules are too large to get through the gaps in that membrane, it means that the water has to move to balance out the concentrations rather than the sugar doing it. Okay, so that's the process of osmosis. The third method of transport is active transport, and that's the movement of substances from where they're more dilute to where they're more concentrated. So we're going against the concentration gradient. And because we're going against that concentration gradient, it requires energy to be supplied in order for those particles to be moved. They physically have to be taken from one place to another. Okay, effectively, it's like taking something uphill, going against the concentration gradient. If you're going with the concentration gradient, you can let that thing roll downhill by itself. If you're going against the concentration gradient, you have to put some energy in to move it. Okay, and the place we get that energy from is respiration. Now, in plants, active transport is used to absorb mineral ions from the soil into the roots. There's not a high concentration of mineral ions in the soil, but the plants need those ions in order to perform basic functions. So the cell membranes of the root have to be designed to try and deliberately absorb those ions. And in mammals, the process of absorbing sugar from the gut into the bloodstream. The bloodstream in general has a higher sugar concentration than your digested food does. So the glucose has to go against the concentration gradient. And then we can use that sugar for respiration, which can provide the energy for active transport. Okay, so those are the key types of transport in plants and animals that you need to know about. Hope that made sense, and I'll see you next time.